Kevin, if you would just explain to people who are new to how we work, how it's going to happen, how to use the chat room and so forth.
Sure. We're going to record this public meeting.
Yes.
And just so you know, I'm going to mute everybody. I'm a little ruthless on the muting. If you can see in the top left, it shows who's speaking, and there should only be, one person speaking at a time. So if you're muted, just be aware of that and unmute yourself as needed. Anybody on a phone, that would be *6. We have somebody who just entered with the phone numbers ending in 28. Can I just find out who that is?
It's George Redder.
Hey, George.
Oh, hi, George. Welcome back.
Well, what can I tell you? I'm in isolation, but I'll stay here for a while.
Okay. Oh, dear. All right. Thank you for being here.
All right, so I'm just going to try to be invisible. I'm going to play whack-a-mole with the mute button, and I will let Patty run the show.
Okay. First, I'd like to do a roll call vote, so I will call the members of the ZBA. Tim Scott. Just say you're here, so for the record. Okay. Holly Strutt. Oh, Holly can't talk to us, but she can see us.
I can hear.
Okay, good. Okay. And Joe Mayone?
I'm here.
Excellent. And I think I've gotten everybody, so we have a quorum. Henry Rua is traveling, is not able to join us today, so I would like to ask Holly if you would join the board for this meeting. Holly is normally an alternate. Will you join for this meeting, Holly?
Yes, I will.
Good, thank you. I just want to introduce a few people who are on the call and are consultants for the ZBA. We have Dan Schuster, who many of you know is a planner for the ZBA. And Ron Grafe is not on the call yet. And I don't see John Lyons or Kim yet. So when they come on, we'll introduce them as well. I just want to give, if there are any people on this call who are thinking that they're coming to a continuing public hearing for the Ulster County Communications Tower in Quarryville, that has been postponed at the request of the county. And so they will be on next month's meeting. The only other thing I would like to just remind people, this is not a public hearing. This is the first time that we are hearing about this application from Mr. Olson. Mr. Crosby is here. The builder of the tower is here. And so this is an opportunity for the board to ask questions of them, for them to answer, to explain their proposal to us. And then the public hearing will be set at another time. So we will do that. In terms of this particular application, as you saw, if you saw the agenda, the applicants would like to construct a 159-foot monopole, including the antenna, commercial telecommunications facility at 17 Industrial Road. They presented that to the building inspector's office. They were denied because they need area variances, and we are here to discuss that. The applicants are requesting a 79.5 front yard variance, I'm losing my voice, a 50.5 left side variance, and a 73.5 right side yard variance. So Mr. Olson, if you would just introduce to the rest of the people, your colleagues on the call, then the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Chairwoman Kelly. My name is Scott Olson, and I apologize. My video cameras are not working, but at least you can hear me. So we have here tonight, Brett Bugelin is with the Tarpon Towers group, and he, like Patty said, he represents the tower builder who has an arrangement with Verizon Wireless. So Verizon will, if this tower is approved, Verizon will be the first tenant on the tower for use of its antennas and equipment. We also have Mike Crosby with us. Mike is the Verizon Wireless RF engineer. And so to the extent that the board has any technical questions, Mike is more than happy to answer them. And I think that's all we have. Nope, we have Kathy Pomponio, I saw just joined. Kathy Pomponio is the Verizon Wireless real estate manager responsible for this site and market. And I think that constitutes our team.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
The floor is yours.
Okay, so what I can do, because we are still in this COVID lockdown and virtual meetings, I can share a little PowerPoint presentation that shows you some of the materials that we've submitted to date, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. And do you see that?
We do.
Excellent. All right, that just happens to be the middle of
Is there
it.
any way to make the screen larger?
There is, I think. Does that help?
Is that good for everybody? Just speak up.
I can do a little better, I think, too.
I think when we get to the maps and to the site plan, it might be a little small, but the bigger you can do when we get to those points, that would be good.
All right, I'll do my best. So,
Okay.
We refer to this site as Glasgow Turnpike. It's just an internal name that's used. Obviously, Glasgow Turnpike is nearby. But for this particular site that we are now proposing, it's specifically 17 Industrial Drive or Road. As you know, this map just shows you the original search area that we came to the town for the Mount Marion Fire Department site, which the search area is that circle in red. And I've got an arrow drawn to the Mount Marion Fire Department at the approximate location that we were proposing before. I've included that's not part of this application, obviously, but I just wanted to give everybody, the board, perspective as to what we're doing. In January, as part of that application, we were asked to look at some properties along Industrial Road. Is it Drive or Road? I'm sorry.
Road.
All right, well, I refer to it as Drive. I apologize. I'll make those corrections.
That's okay.
So we were asked by the zoning board to look at these properties along Industrial Road, and they're labeled on the map 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we did that. We looked at and we provided some documentation to that. But for our purposes, parcels 3 through 6 were not available. The property owners were not willing to enter into a lease. So we had parcels 1 and 2 that were left. Both of the owners for those parcels were willing to enter into a lease. If you look at just this aerial, though, you'll see that parcel 2 has somewhat of a constraint in that there's a building right in the middle of the parcel. So if we were to put a tower on that property, we would have to have more intense setback variances. And since the law generally says go with the least impactful site, with the site that needs the lesser of the variances, we pursued parcel number 1, which is 17 Industrial Road. As you can see, I think you can see, there is a building on the property, but it's in the southeast corner, which means the rest of the property that I'm kind of circling is all open and available. So we were able to engineer a site, and here's an aerial depicting where the lease area would be, how we would gain access from Industrial, well, this is labeled Drive, but we'll call it Road. Essentially, we've leased, or Tarpon has leased, a 10,000 square foot parcel in the center, approximate center of the property. And that's the general layout. And I don't know if you can see this. It's a little fuzzy on my screen. If it's fuzzy on yours, I apologize. But this shows you the various setbacks from Industrial Road, as well as the rear and the 2 side setbacks.
Let me just interrupt for one moment for members of the public. All of this information is on the website, and you can access it, you can enlarge it, and so forth. If it's obviously you can't see it very well here, but it is available to you should you want to look at it. Okay, I'm sorry, Scott, go ahead.
No, that's okay, and I apologize. I was trying to work with our engineers just to get these to be clearer. I'm not sure. I'm probably doing something wrong with PowerPoint, but essentially we've called out the need for 3 variances, and like Patty said earlier, the building inspector or CEO also identified the need for those 3 variances. One is a front yard variance. Under your tower law, you require a setback of 1 1/2 times the height of the tower. So because we're proposing a 159-foot tower, we would need a 239-foot setback variance from each property line. We don't have that except for the rear. The rear, we have 262 feet, so that's good. A variance is not required. The other 3, arguably 3, as I look at this, I'm not sure how it's to be interpreted. Clearly the front, we don't meet that. We only have 159 feet. And the side going to the north, we have 100 and it looks like 186 feet or so. I'm not sure about the other side because our engineer was very conservative and they called out 165 foot to the side. But if you look, it really goes further. So that's really probably going to be an interpretation issue for the our zoning board. But to be conservative, we called out the need for 3 variances.
Scott, which one, you have a left side and a right side. For the board and the public, please identify which one is the right side. Is that along the Kings Highway?
So Kings Highway is on the south?
Yes.
Then that should be, let me just double check.
It looks like that from the
Yes.
size of, that's the right side. Okay, just so everybody's clear which is the right and which is the left. Thank you.
Yes, no, you're welcome. So, and, you know, if you looked at the CEO's denial letter, it was also referenced that we might need a height variance for the tower, but I don't think that we need a height variance because I provided a couple of sections in your law where clearly radio towers and structures such as this are exempt from the height requirement. And if you look in the tower specific regulations, there's also a section that talks about we can go up to 199 feet or so, give or take. So I don't think that's necessary, but
Well, I verified that. I also checked it too when you had said to me that you didn't think it was necessary. And there is a section of our zoning law that deals with this specifically. I think it's 245-13 about bulk, and it talks about height and exemptions. Anything over 100 feet has to have planning board review. So before you can get the special permit. So, but people are allowed to have towers such as this can have are an exception. Church steeples and so forth are an exception. So there's a list of exceptions in there, and this type of tower is an exception.
Yes.
But you would not be able to go over 100 feet without the planning board. So, but you knew that you're going to have to go to the planning board anyway. So
correct. Exactly. This is the first step in a 2-step
right.
process.
So that's why I did not include the height thing in the variance request, because it's not called for by the zoning law.
And that's what I thought. And so I think we are on the same page.
Yes.
And we will be going to the planning board, assuming we get through this process and the board ultimately approves the variances. Then we
Right.
would go to the planning board for the special use permit and site plan review.
Right.
So, correct. All right. So we're here for just those 3 area variances. As you are well aware, the board at least, the prior application involved a use variance also, but because we're in the light office industrial zoning district here, that according to your zoning law permits these types of facilities. So we don't need a use variance. Like I said, we just need a special use permit from the planning board along with site plan review. So we've got the 3 variances that we're requesting. And, you know, the next bunch of slides I have are all radio frequency related, similar to what we provided before. They talk about the need, the capacity, the propagation maps, and we're happy to talk about those if you would like. Mike will talk about those if you want a brief overview. It's up to the board.
I think we would like to see them. I have some questions about the maps later on, but I think most important is we move on to the site plan itself and the variances and whether or not we can ask questions about that at this point.
Please do. It's your show.
Okay. Zoning board, do you have any questions right off the bat? Any members of the board? Because you know I do. All right, well, I'll start and anybody can jump in. Scott, on the bottom of the property setback plan, there's a note in small print, by the way, that says the property lines are approximate based on GIS data and are for orientation purposes only. They do not represent boundary or property decision by a land surveyor. Now, I am sure you understand that that is a problem. We cannot make decisions on approximate measurements, nor is it fair to people who live there and whose homes may be impacted to have us talking about approximate measures. So I wanted to know if you are planning or are already in the works of doing a survey to get more authoritative and definitive numbers so that we are all working from something that's very real and not just approximate.
Sure, and I unfortunately Steve Matthews could not be here. You may remember Steve. He is with Tectonic Engineering. He's the surveyor, and I don't know right now if the survey is in process, but we certainly understand the concern. This is very typical for what we do for the initial map. It's just intended to show, for our first meeting, the concept, where we are. But I will talk to Steve about the survey issues and getting further detailed information.
I think that's very important, particularly for the group of properties that are right along Kings Highway in the property. So that's good. And I think that makes me feel better as a zoning board person, and I'm sure the property owners too. The other question I have right from the get-go is the zoning board is going to want to do a site visit. Will you let the Kidco folks know that we're going to be over there at some point? We won't all be together. We'll all be coming at different times. And also, will you mark, if you haven't already done so, where the tower is so that we all know exactly we're looking at the same thing? And just like you did at the Mount Marion Firehouse, where the fencing will be.
Yeah, we will definitely let the property owner know about that so that there are no misunderstandings. And I'm assuming, yes, I recall we did that. We marked the site for the board at the Mount Marion Fire Department. So we'll have somebody out in the field to do that so you can see where it's going to be. If it hasn't already been done, there's probably a stake in the ground.
I saw a stake. I did drive over there today, but I didn't want to go on the property without him being notified that we would be doing so. And I saw a stake, but I don't know what that, I didn't go to see what it was for. It may be for the tower, but I just didn't know.
My sense and guess is it's probably for the tower.
Okay.
But I'll talk to Steve Matthews and find out. And if you can't, we can probably put, I think what we did last time, we put 4 other stakes in at the corners of the fence.
And each stake was marked so that we knew what it was.
Okay. What corner exactly?
Yeah. Okay. Those are the 2 questions that I had about the site. Does anybody else from the board, or does Dan Schuster, would you have a question about the site, this particular portion of it? Are they unmuted, Kevin, so that they could talk? Kevin, can you hear?
Yes, I can. I can't unmute people. I can only mute them. So I see Dan there present. Dan, do you have questions? You want to wave your hands or unmute yourself? No, looks like no. Oh,
okay.
Does he?
Patty, it's Joe Mayone.
Yep, go ahead, Joe.
I'm just wondering, is the position of the tower in the best, is the optimum spot to request the smallest or least variances on these sides that you've requested? Is there a better position so the variance request would be smaller?
Well, it's hard to say until we do a site review. I was over there today and I thought that maybe the one that is not requesting a variance, excuse me, might go back a little further, but there is a house back there. So,
Okay.
until we see the site, I think that's hard for us to make an assessment. I'm sure they did too. I would assume Verizon, you don't want, to have these setbacks if you don't need them.
I was asking Verizon, Patty. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, so
Scott, do you want to ask that?
we'll certainly ask the question, but from what I can see here, even if we were to move, well, I don't know the elevation. I think that's a critical factor, and I have not been to the site. So again, unless, Brett or I know Steve's not here, that could be an issue because obviously, as we spoke about in the last application, height and elevation is everything in this technology.
Right.
So, I'll have to ask Steve about that and find out what the reason was for that exact spot. I mean, we're pretty close on everywhere. Maybe
Yeah.
you could get a little less of a variance for the front if you moved it back, but I don't know if that affects elevation, so I don't want to
think
commit.
so. Yeah.
You know.
And it might actually impact more, one property, the one that's the closest, actually. I don't know the name of that property, the number, but, it wouldn't moving it back wouldn't make that better.
Yeah,
Let's
we're
put it
only
that way.
talking about exactly like what 30. So we need 239 feet. So on the rear, we're not even moving it back 25 feet.
Right.
So it's not going to make that much of a difference.
Okay.
May I make a comment? It's Ron.
Is this Ron Grave?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
hey,
here.
Ron's here.
Hi. Yeah, I had a little trouble getting online.
Okay.
Just a question. I had compared the original application at the firehouse. There was a survey done there versus what was done at this site. And I only discovered a 4-foot difference in height above average mean sea level, AMSL, between this site, which is 4 feet higher than the other site. So I think your questions about where it is on this site, especially with the height of the tower proposed, seem to be almost insignificant. If there were a 30-foot difference between this particular site and the one chosen at the fire station, and remember, they're approximately a mile apart, which to me would be
Less than a mile.
I mean, it's insignificant as far as doing the radials to calculate coverage. And we will get into this later, but I just point out, I only saw a 4-foot difference, and you can check me on that for certain, look at the survey, that if you moved it around here, and if went +2, -1, +5, -4, it really is a rounding error, and it really doesn't matter. So if that's what it takes to meet your requirements. And by the way, you also know my feelings about setback requirements. I find them really interesting that the tower, if it ever did fall in one piece like it doesn't, would never fall and then jump up and jump another half its height. So you may want to look at that, or the ZBA, whoever does that. But this will be critical when we ultimately look at the height required for this structure, because as you see, it is significant. Thank you.
Patty, if you don't mind, I could make Ron, rest easy tonight. I could agree with him that it's only about a 5-foot difference in elevation. It is lower at this proposed location versus the original firehouse application, only by about 5 feet. But the good news for Ron is that the location that the tower is proposed at on the parcel is not driven by RF need. It's driven by the A&E review of the property and their best fit attempt to try to position the tower on the property to try to meet the setbacks as best as possible. And I do agree with Ron that a 1-to-1 setback, which is typically, industry type, it's typically the standard. And from an RF opinion, that's typically seen as more than adequate from a property line. Obviously, I'm not dictating the code to the town, but I do think that we have a good situation where we meet at least that minimum 1-to-1 in all directions. But it's not positioned because of RF need, Ron. So it really comes down to the A&E folks that are doing the best they can to try to locate it.
Well, good, Mike. We agree on that. I'm delighted. Yes, you know what? Here we go. Start here. But then we will address then the issues further along in this because, by the way,
Let's wait till we get to them.
yeah, Mike and I have had comments about this, and I'm still waiting for more information about this. But
Okay.
right now, we're taking care of this, and we're in agreement. No problem. Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Anybody else?
Patty, could I raise a related issue?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Dan.
It's part of the same subject matter. I don't see any place in what was submitted a justification for the specific height proposed of the tower. It says we're proposing a 154-foot tower or 59-foot, but there's no justification. There's no comparison what the coverage would be with a lower tower. And I think that's important in two respects. The lower the tower would be, the less any variances required would be, and it will affect the visual analysis, which is part of the seeker determination that's going to have to be. So I think that a height justification analysis is required.
Dan, we agree with you,
Mike
and we
sorry, go
we
ahead.
do have, we did receive that request from Ron a couple weeks ago, and we are in the process, and we have prepared a supplemental section for the RF justification labeled height justification. So we do have several slides available, but because they became finished up too close to the time of the meeting, we didn't want to put those out on everybody, and we just want to acknowledge that we did hear the request, and we have prepared that information, and you will have that shortly, so you'll have plenty of time to review that before the next meeting. So thank you, Ron and Dan.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question or a comment from the board? Okay, Mr. Olson, maybe we can move on to the coverage maps.
Sure, and I have coverage maps and capacity because, as Mike will explain, this site is a dual purpose site. It's not just needed for coverage, it's also needed for capacity. So,
right.
Where are we going here?
May I ask a question about that before you begin, Scott?
Yeah, go ahead.
Or Mike, in your opinion, has the capacity need, especially in the higher frequencies, has it changed since the initial application was filed? Are we going to see something new regarding capacity, or are we going to kind of see the same thing with overload of the different functions in the LTE signal? I mean, that might help the board.
Yeah, I think we have a good situation here where it should be very simple since we went through fairly exhaustive exercise on this for Mount Marion Fire Department. We're going to the traffic growth is a continuation of what was presented previously. We've just updated the capacity charts for the same sites we talked about previously, which was, if you recall, Kingston Alpha and Saugerties Beta. Those remain the two overloaded sectors. They're overloaded on all the same KPIs. We've just updated those charts so that this application is current in that regard. So it really is the same exact thing that we reviewed before. So I would expect that Ron his findings will be that, as found for Mount Marion, that he agrees that there's a capacity constraint as well as a coverage gap associated with this proposed location.
And then just for the record, in the review of the previously fire department application, I found that the applicant had demonstrated a severe undercapacity of those sites that have the greatest bandwidth, carry the most traffic. I never opined on the lower frequency, 700 megahertz of the 850 to carry this traffic. But as far as the ones that are claiming to be in trouble, the ones that are in trouble, the lower ones, that's basically the same. There hasn't been any monumental change. And that, to simplify things for the board, it was justified once. Now we have to look at, will the proposed application meet the needs to do this, and that'll be a little more complicated. But please, I just wanted to point that out. So I'm not in disagreement on what I've seen so far. Thank you.
Okay, so
The slide
this,
that, oh, I'm sorry, Scott, go ahead.
oh, so all, Mike, you're going to talk, but all these slides I took directly from Mike's RF analysis, with the exception that if you see comment on the side that say 100% capacity, that's my insertion. I just wanted to do it for presentation purposes because the slide is a little fuzzy the way it was replicated. So other than that, it's Mike's work, and Mike, take it away.
So what you're looking at here, this is in relation. So when we tell the story of why a site is needed, it really comes down to coverage and capacity. And so this particular slide is telling a story about what is going on capacity-wise with the existing sites. In this case, Kingston HD Alpha. And as Scott had mentioned, he's called out so that it's a little bit easier to see the 100% capacity. Now, there's two different ways to present capacity. The common way to present capacity is usually in a futuristic sense, because usually when a site like this is being developed, we're forecasting that at some point in the future, 1 year out, 2 years out, or 3 years out, that that site's going to reach exhaustion and that a site is needed to help mitigate that. The ideal scenario and what we target for is to have that site on air before we reach capacity. In instances like Saugerties in the Mount Marion area, Glasgow Turnpike project, we've already have reached exhaustion in this area for a long time. So that it makes the most sense to provide empirical data that gives you a real view of what the actual traffic is and not what's forecasted. So what we're giving you here is we're actually giving you 1 year of past and historical trending on the site so that you can see throughout the last year, you can see there's two different sets of lines here. There's a purple line, which I know is very difficult to see on here, and I don't expect anybody to actually be able to make it out. You're gonna have to take my word for it, that there's a purple and a red line that represent the low bands that Ron was just talking about, as well as the dark red line, which is the higher frequencies, AWS in this case. And so these sites that cover long distance, what happens is the lower frequencies, the 700 and 850, has the ability to cover long distances where the AWS and PCS does not. So in order for us to be able to properly handle the amount of traffic on the network, we have to have coverage from all of our bands of service in these areas. And in this case, the primary issue is that our low bands, the 700, 850, are being overloaded. Those are the purple lines. So as you can see throughout the year, there's several instances as this site on this particular KPI, which is FDB, forward data volume, is showing that we're exceeding capacity. So if Scott, if you go to the next slide, I believe it should be ASEU, if you have them in the order that came out of the presentation.
Should be. There you go.
Yep. So you can see here that on ASEU, this is our primary issue with the low frequencies. Because these frequencies cover so far, and that's a benefit to us that we're able to have coverage in many places. The unfortunate part is because not all the frequencies operate the same, these frequencies become severely overloaded. In this case, you're talking about thousands of % utilization. So this is a very severe congestion issue. It's one of the worst that I've seen. So there's no question in this area that the network is severely overloaded and requires capacity relief. So we've been trying for several years, I think in the neighborhood of 5 years, to provide a site in this area. The longer that situation continues, the worse this capacity and the more dangerous, for the community this becomes, because this is not just, as simple as somebody having a poor throughput test on their phone. This could be the difference between to be able to make a phone call or not be able to make a phone call, even with a guaranteed bit rate for phone calls. So
just for full disclosure, you're only showing the 700 megahertz capacity utilization. As you know, you've got the 850, which you're refarming now. What will you tell the board about the new frequencies that you will be bringing to this 4G LTE in the future that may ameliorate these terrible overloads? I mean, it's intuitively obvious. It's dramatically overloaded as far as schedule is concerned, but you're only looking at 700, and 800 is now being farmed to this. What do you say to the board about that, about the assets that you have, perhaps to ameliorate this?
So in situations like here, what actually in all of our justifications, our standard way to portray this information for the sake of clarity is that our 700 representation is representative of the low band frequencies. We use that as a representative band. So 700 and 850 are very similar, while AWS and PCS are very similar. So instead of having so much information on this chart that you can't read it, we provide 700 in AWS as those representative bands. So as Ron mentioned, over the last several years, we've been able to migrate a lot of the 850 traffic off of the old 3G CDMA network, and we're able to use that additional spectrum. Even though we're only able to use a portion of that, we're able to use additional spectrum to try to help offload. Now, 850 doesn't have a one-to-one offload with 700. Just because the frequencies are similar doesn't mean that they have the similar power levels or number of PRB blocks to be able to handle the same amount of traffic. So it's not 100% one-to-one, but we're showing you the strongest, most representative band to create that image. So we have, typically at these sites, we'll have all 4 carriers. So this site's designed to be activated with all 4 carriers of service to maximize the capacity capabilities, as well as the neighboring sites, which are already maxed out. So we've already added all of the carriers we have available, all the frequencies we have available at these existing sites. And even with doing that, we're still experiencing thousands of % utilization. Now you can't see the AWS on this particular slide because the 700 is so high in traffic that you can't actually see where the AWS is, but it's below 100%. And again, that's because the AWS is a higher frequency and doesn't propagate or travel as far, so it's not able to serve the same footprint, and I'll help offload that 700. That's why we need to densify the network with a site like Glasgow Turnpike.
You're not considering carrier aggregation, where the phone can look at 2 different carriers at the same time, a 700 or an 850 or a 2100, and get the capacity it needs. I mean, I think that's important to because once again, you can demonstrate anything with 1 frequency, notwithstanding what you're saying. But you have 4 frequencies you can work with here, and we don't know what distances these are, where this is happening or how it's happening. But you do experience all the new phones now handle carrier aggregation, where they can operate on 2 different or 3 different or 4 different carriers. In other words, 750, 700, 850, 1900, 2100 at the same time to try to ameliorate the loss of capacity. Are you saying that this is demonstrating that, or this is still?
It absolutely is demonstrating that, because Ron, what happens is you cannot carrier ag if those frequencies are not present. So in the case of the Glasgow Turnpike I-87 project area, we do not have those additional frequencies that you'd like to aggregate. We'd love to aggregate those, and we will absolutely be able to aggregate those additional frequencies as soon as we have Glasgow Turnpike I-87 site on air. As it exists today, we barely have 700 in many of these areas by
Okay, touche.
itself. Thank you.
So Mike, this is just, again, this is just another capacity slide. I don't know if we have to go through everyone in
average
detail.
AC, throughout the year, you'll see that the traffic fluctuates. Yep, and you can go on to the next one. So we go through, I think that was Kingston Alpha, and then Saugerties Beta is a very similar story. So you can see again throughout the year, we're seeing severe overutilization of the 700 megahertz frequency off of Saugerties Beta. And really the reason for that is because these sites are covering in excess of 3 miles. You're looking at 3.5, 4 mile footprints off of those sectors, and that's just, that's a really long distance, especially considering, a good mid-band, cell radius is usually 1.5 miles or less. So, in this case, you're more than double what the typical usable radius is of a mid-band service on those neighboring big sites. So here you can see the existing 700 megahertz coverage, and you can see that, obviously the site is situated, mostly in the middle of, this large, relatively weak area. And for the benefit of those looking on, you can see that we have 3 different coverage levels here. We have the -5, -95, and -105 dBm represented by the respectively the green, yellow, and orange service. And so that orange service is what we call a variable coverage area. And so while that -105 service represents an area where you typically can expect to make rural highway coverage calls, which is representative of I-87 through this area, it is not representative of the ability to provide adequate and reliable coverage in the residential areas, as well as some of the denser foliage, side streets and residential areas throughout Mount Marion's Park and surrounding areas. You can see the white areas; those are variable to no coverage areas. So we know that there's areas here, and we've heard from the customers in this area for years. They've been asking us to improve service here. So that's the goal, is to try to help benefit the community here with adequate and reliable coverage. You can see you go from the existing coverage to the proposed coverage, and we have a very nice solid infill. And while it's solid throughout the primary coverage objectives, there's still other areas, in areas of severe terrain where there's still going to be some areas that are not, ideal, but you can only do so much with each site. You have to be realistic in its expectations. And we're talking about the low band versus the mid band. So this is switching to the mid band. This is that AWS PCS type coverage. And as you can see here, that the overall network coverage is weaker. And again, that's because of the higher frequency. So you have larger gaps in service. So in order to fix those ASEU slides that we saw in the capacity charts, we have to have the AWS PCS frequencies present. And as you can see, they're not even present in this area. So if you go, Scott, to the next slide, you'll see we're able to fill in a significant gap in that area where terrain allows. And these slides are all showing the proposed site at 17 Industrial Drive at 146-foot center line.
And that might be it. That is it.
Okay.
So.
I have a question before, Mike, before you just go back to one of those slides, that last one that you showed. Okay. Here's the problem I have with the maps, and it's the same problem we've discussed before. I know I've gotten used to your maps, but this one doesn't even give you an indication of where some of the major roads like Glasgow Turnpike is or Churchland Road. I want to look at this map and I want to see, is the Mount Marion School finally covered? Is Mount Marion Park covered? And it's just impossible to get a sense of distance. There's no way to assess how much is a mile or something like that. There's no scale. Is there any way that you can put something on these maps to say, here's the Mount Marion School? That gives us a sense of where we are. And when we look at Mount Marion, where Mount Marion Park is.
Sure, that's no problem at all. What we'll do is we'll put points of interest on the map. Unfortunately,
it's so important because
the
those
underlying,
are the areas. Yeah,
the underlying maps are difficult to read at this scale.
Right, and I want to see
when we're able to zoom in, you can see a lot more detail. But what Scott and I talked about earlier today was, into planners' comments about height justification. The height justification was going to include some slides that are better zoomed in with these coverages, so that you'll be able to see those in greater detail.
Okay.
So that's part of what we're going to be providing in a supplemental.
I mean, we've been talking about the same areas for a long, long time now,
Sure.
and we need to see them. We need to see, okay, finally it's going to be covered. This is covered. We want to see Churchland Road. I need to see that road on there, and some of the other roads, because in one of the maps, it looked like it was great coverage. In fact, it was the, I think it was the 700 MHC, or I forget. One of them had little purple areas in there. And purple, I'm assuming, means no coverage because it didn't relate to any of your best signals. But I couldn't tell what it was because I had no sense of scale on this map. So I couldn't even figure out where they were and what they included and what they didn't. So that's important for the board. I'm sure it's important for the public too, so that they can look at a map and they can identify areas that they know in Mount Marion. And that way they'll have a better sense of what this map is covering.
Sure, I understand that.
Please, Mike and Patty. It's the same old song with a different beat.
Yeah.
As these both Scott and Mike know, my position on coverage maps, number one, do we care what, if you look at this map in front of us, way off to the left side, I don't even know where that is. I can't even read it on this. Do I care about it? No. All I care about is that immediate area that's probably within less than 4 miles from either the site or the search ring, right in the center of this map, number one. Number two, the scale is much too large. I don't care what's going over on the right-hand side. That's not the subject of this application. It's right here, and I wish you could see my mouse dancing around in the center of this. And
well,
that's
I hope that you guys could I hope you could appreciate that, Socrates Beta and Kingston Alpha are part of this application.
But
And
we're
you'll
looking,
probably notice that the north part of the screen and the south part of the screen barely encompass those two sites.
well,
And so while
we're
it's
looking-
not our intention to provide a map that is too difficult for you to read,
But
it
it
is
does
our
include,
intention to provide the minimum number of sites that are mentioned throughout the justification. So as
Or
I
it
does
mentioned,
include
we don't have
Tivoli.
any disagreement. I understand that
Right.
you can't read parts of it. And as part of the supplemental, I am telling you that I will include those
Right.
points of interest and
Right.
provide a more zoomed in map that
Right.
helps reveal those locations so it's
then,
easier to
but
read.
then,
We
Mike,
do have town lines and we do have I-87 through
That's
there,
enough.
so
a
there's some
much better
information
map,
that you should be able to read.
as you know from countless applications. What a board really understands is a 7.5 minute topographic map, because then it's easy to see where Mount Marion High School is, or the hospital, or the roads are, because they're more specified on a 7.5 minute map as opposed to this, I call these Rand McNally maps. I mean, these are useless. Number one, they don't show terrain to any significant. Perhaps there's some terrain in there, but boy, I can't see it. And they don't show roads. They don't show buildings. They don't show where the villages are. You claim that you need minus 85 dBm RSRP to get into a building. Well, do you see any buildings on this map? You say that you need minus 95 to cover a highway. Do you see any highways on this map? That's the issue that really sells it to a board, and you know this as well as I do after countless applications. Give them that they can say, and Patty can say, oh yeah, I know where that spot is. I've seen it, and I know I can see, I can recognize the crossroads. Change the scale, bring it in a little bit, and I understand what you're saying, that these sites to the north and to the south are ones that are providing the can't get in there, and that's what you have to coverage. But those sites exist. You can't change those. What you're trying to do is change the white area and the tan area and the yellow area in this area to make it all green, or at least yellow. I mean, that's what you're shooting for. And to show them that, I think this is a matter of demonstrating to the board the real need. And as you know, I have not complained about the need. I've just complained about the presentation, because this will ultimately get into the minimum height necessary, because I don't understand why a site that's less than a mile away, with a difference in 4 or 5 feet in elevation, requires a 90-foot versus, what is it, 160-foot tower?
It's a
I mean,
120-foot tower versus a 150-foot tower.
okay, and that's what the coverage alternates that we talked about are going to attempt to demonstrate for the board, because that's what they are, you know what, I'm not going to speak for the board, whatever they're wrestling with now, that's their deal. I'm just trying to help them to get all the best information that they can make the proper decision here. I mean,
Thanks. Mike, just to put my little thing, on the maps, we don't need to see Tivoli and Dutchess County. We can lose them, and I think all of us would feel comfortable making a decision without knowing. And I understand that there's other portions of cell towers that are over there, but for our purposes, we don't need that. I mean, unless somebody from the board feels that they need to see what's going on in Tivoli and Red Hook and so forth, but
Yeah.
we
We didn't put those in there. I mean, I can assure you that there's no strategic advantage or anything of that nature by including this. It's totally a function of a horizontal screenshot in allowing to try to show you the sites that are impacted. Because if, Scott, if you go to the proposed 700 coverage, you can see the proposed 700 coverage fills up most of the screen from north to south. And so I can zoom in on that. And I promise you that I'm going to do that as part of the supplemental. So there's nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
So I actually, in what I've already presented, which I have on my other screen here, we've actually already formatted the screen so that it's zoomed in further. And it's actually set up so that it's a narrow portrait style image instead of the wide horizontal. So the supplemental that we've already prepared already has that. So I think that you're going to be happy with what we present.
but just use a better base map, please. One that the board
We'll do what we can. I think that this one has a lot more information on it, that when you zoom in, you can see a lot more. It's just the size of the gap in coverage is so astronomically large here that, you know, we're dealing with a scale that the mapping program, especially when we're looking at this on half the size of the screen, it makes it very difficult to read these things. When you're
That's
looking at
true.
it full screen, it's much better for starters. And number two, we are going to provide more zoomed in. So I will make sure that regardless of what the underlying base map is, it will have good detail. And we have gone through that exercise before. And we did provide maps that showed each of the houses. And I think that we'll be able to satisfy your requests.
And the gold
That's right.
standard
Thank you
there
very
would be a
much.
7.5 minute
Thank you.
topographic map. Okay, it'll show where villages are. It will show where
Ron.
minor groups are. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't have any other, those were the only questions that I had on the coverage maps, is that I really couldn't see what the area was. So, does anybody from the board have any questions, for either Ron or for Mike or for Scott? Scott, do you want to take down this thing so we can talk to the board face to face? Or do you have more that you want to put?
No, that's it. Just looking for the
Okay.
stop sharing button, which I just found.
So that would be good. Anybody from the board, you may be muted, so you'd have to unmute yourself if you. I hear no questions. Okay. I want to just let the public and and everybody else on here to know that we have scheduled a balloon test at this site. It's happening on April 14th. With a rain date or a bad weather date or an inclement weather date for the 15th. It'll be April 14th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. The rain date is the 15th or the very first day after that the weather improves. And all interested parties, I urge you to kind of go take a look at your area, see if you could see. They'll float 2 balloons. One is a marker balloon. Am I right, Scott?
Yes, that's correct. So we're trying to maintain consistency with what was requested of us last. It was about a year ago, actually. And we will have a marker balloon floated at about 200 feet. That was what was requested from the board last time.
Okay.
So we kept maintain that consistency, and then the lower balloon will be at the tower height.
Right. So if you only see one balloon, then you will not be able to see the tower. And the reason we wanted to do it now is we wanted to get this balloon test done before the trees were in full leaf, so that everybody will have a really good sense of whether or not they'll be able to see the tower in the winter or the late fall. And I guess that's all I needed to say. Is there anything else the board needs to ask of Scott at this point? If not, would anybody like to make a motion to schedule a public hearing? Any board member?
I'll make the motion to schedule a public hearing.
Is that Tim?
Yes.
Do I have a
Joe.
second?
Joe will second.
Joe will second. Okay, can I just do a roll call vote? Because I need your voices because I can't see you all. Tim?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Holly?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So the meeting, the first public hearing on this will take place on,
May 3rd.
thank you, May 3rd at 7 p.m. And for other people who are just joining us for the first time and haven't been on these calls before, whenever we get documents, we put them up on the ZBA website. The document for the balloon test we put on the townwide website because it pertains to people not just in Mount Marion that are involved in this. So we want people townwide to be aware of it so they can keep a lookout too. As much as we try to get photographs from individual properties, we may not get everything in the town. But other than that, everything goes on the website, and you can find the application there right now. And when we get the revised maps from Mike Crosby, they'll go up there too. So I would just suggest you check in on a regular basis so that you can get every piece of information that the board gets as well. Any other questions from anybody before we leave? If not, we have some additional business on the ZBA side, you know, doing minutes and stuff like that, but and everybody's welcome to stay, or you can leave.
Patty, if
Thank
I
you
could-
very much.
If I
Okay.
could just speak to, before Scott leaves, that, we'll be in touch with him about the letters and what have you that need to be sent
Oh,
out.
right. Kevin, thank you for reminding me. See, I'm so new at this job.
And
Scott, did you hear that?
I think I did. Kevin will be in touch. Yeah, just send me a request for whatever you need, and I'll get it to you.
Yeah,
Right, there's a-
we'll be sending you the list of the properties within the 500-foot
Oh,
radius
I'm sorry. Of course.
and the
Yep.
template letter and all of that.
You
And
got it.
those who are on the call who live there will be getting a letter just informing you about this so that you have an opportunity to talk. Okay, thanks, everybody. The
Patty,
ZBA
can
just hang in there for a little bit longer.
Patty,
Thank
can
you.
I
Good
just
night.
mention something? Patty, it's John Lyons here. Can you hear me?
Oh, hi, John. Yes, of
Hi,
course.
how are you?
Good.
And Dan, if you could contribute with regard to the questions I was going to raise. Is it the intention of the board to classify this for seeker tonight? And
No, we're not going, we'll do it before the public hearing, but
Okay.
we're not going to do it tonight.
Okay, and when will you be doing your referral to county planning? At that time as well?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The referral to county planning, will you be doing that
Yes.
at that time as well?
Yes.
Okay,
Is that okay? Does that fit within the timeline? I thought it did, but if it's not,
yes. I just wanted to make sure
yes.
that you were thinking
Yes.
about it tonight.
Yeah, Jeannie made me aware that this has to definitely go to the planning board because it's Kings Highway. So, yes, I have to get that application from Dennis Doyle. Oh, goody.
Anything to add, Dan?
No, I think the question is to who will serve as lead agency will come out of that process. And that will determine how the seeker determination goes.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Oh, hi, Kim. I'm seeing you now too. Hi. Okay, so for the board, I'd like to make a motion to approve the March 1st minutes. Is there anybody that will second that?
I'll second.
Okay, Tim seconds. Any discussion? Okay, all in
No.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good. Okay, approved. Is there anything else that the board needs to talk about before we close?
I don't believe so.
Hearing none, I will bid you all good night. And we'll see you at the public hearing. Thanks for participating, everybody.
I'll move.
Have a good evening.
Good night.